Anyway, tonight I really want to talk about the brain with respect to grains and multiple sclerosis and what it means. And I thought it was interesting, a lot of your comments were, oh, I'm looking forward to hearing you talk about gluten-free. And I thought, geez, I could talk for hours on gluten-free. I used to give a 200 slide presentation on gluten-free and autoimmunity and such. So I wasn't planning on making it an entirely gluten-free discussion, but I did go back and just pull out a couple of little slides to complement our talk today. So what is it about grains in the brain? The more we learn about grains, the more GMO'd and sprayed grains are, the more we process grains, the more we mix refined grains with sugar and eggs and milk to make yummy, fluffy treats, the worse the grain story gets. So we know so much today with a completely obese culture and a completely over autoimmune culture about what we've done through the overuse of grains in our diet than we've ever known. And grains used to actually be their own category. In Canada, we have a food pyramid, or we had, it's old news now. And in the States, you have a similar FDA facilitated diet recommendations. And grains used to be a category on their own. They are no longer. So in Canada, we changed our food pyramid, 3 years ago? So it's even been bounced off of that. So if you want to know more about this, David Perlmutter, the board certified neurologist who I used to talk to quite a bit a long time ago, has literally written the book on grain brain, and specifically grains and neurodegeneration. So where does it all go wrong? It goes wrong in that it goes right back to as far back as we can trace our genes, where grains were something that were eaten in very, very small quantities, very, very infrequently, to modern day where over-processed grains are available all the time, 24/7. And they're, like I said, they're mixed with sugar. They just become these evil things. And just think about it. Think about how we eat typically, toast, bagels, waffles, Pop-Tarts, French toast, cereal, like cold cereal, oatmeal. And that's just breakfast. And then you can move into lunch, and we've got sandwiches, and we've got wraps, and we've got muffins, and we've got crackers. And then we move into dinner, and we've got more buns and bread and pasta and pizza. And it's like, good God, where does this all stop? And so we've really gotten ourselves into a place where what has become normal is completely abnormal as far as your body's metabolism goes. So think about all those foods that I just talked about, and think about this. If I translated those words into words like obesity, pain, depression, sleeplessness, vertigo, autoimmunity, dementia, diabetes, neurodegeneration, multiple sclerosis, would you still be as excited to eat those foods? Because that's exactly what we can do now, is we can directly look at a high carb diet and translate it into major depressive disorder. We can directly connect it to pain. We can directly connect it to autoimmune flares. So, we're addicted to them, and I'm going to talk to that specifically in a little bit. But I want to talk about a couple of key points today, and I've got sort of 3.5 key points here that I wanted to address. And of course, the first one is gluten, because gluten has become a complete non-negotiable in autoimmunity. And once again, the big researcher who's got some lovely stuff on YouTube is Alessio Fasano. So we know that that gluten is just part of the equation for autoimmunity, including multiple sclerosis. So if it's part of that equation and we take that out of the equation, then it's a game changer. It becomes a real game changer. So it's not that long ago, long enough to know that this statistic has probably changed significantly. But when I was doing research for that 200 slide program I was talking to you about before, the New England Journal of Medicine had published a study that linked 57% of all neurological disease with gluten intolerance. And like I said, that number is probably significantly more now, since that was an older study. But talk about 50, even 57%, that is blow your mind significant, okay? And that's gluten intolerance. That's not an allergy that you can go to the allergist and get tested for. That is an intolerance, which is completely non-specific at this point in history, right? We're now seeing medical literature clearly documenting the condition between gluten and movement disorders, because gluten affects the cerebellum of the brain, and the cerebellum is the balance and gate center of the brain. So there's lots of documentation there, and I know incredibly it's incredibly frequent that people give up gluten and actually see an improvement in their mobility. What happens is it acts as a toxin to the gut and forms a large molecule that aggravates the immune system. So by now you're probably getting sick of this analogy about the misdirected immune response, but I'm not going to stop it, because that's what you really need to understand. One of the things that keeps this inappropriate immune response going are large molecules like gluten. And now we know from Alessio Fasano, it doesn't even require that immune complex to irritate the gut. It can actually directly bust open the cells to let all kinds of stuff through to aggravate the immune system. So gluten, modern wheat is also so genetically modified that it includes enormous amounts of gluten, whereas ancient grains used to have about, wheat specifically, used to have about 10% gluten. The modern wheat has about 90% gluten. So you know what? We love our crunchy, stretchy, chewy breads and our flaky pastries, and that's what the market, so to speak, is responding to by making these grains produce more of that stuff. I think it's very interesting and also really well documented that people with multiple sclerosis will have actually demonstrated overt exacerbations or aggravations of the disease, or conversely, speedy recovery when gluten is removed from the diet. So I did pull a few slides out of that presentation, just because I didn't think of it till the last minute, and I'm just going to show them to you here. So this is, the reference for this is Wheat Belly, a book called Wheat Belly, which is another authoritative source for you. But this is just showing how the genetics of wheat has changed over the years. Good old-fashioned einkorn had 14 chromosomes, and now the modern wheat has 42 chromosomes. So high yield dwarf wheat is 99% of what is now grown. So that is the 42 chromosome wheat. And this is just a nice picture of the new versus the old. So you see the old was this elegant, tall crop that grew, like I said, for very specific times during the year. And now we've got this greater yield, shorter, sturdier, stubbier kind of wheat that will grow, for example, in the harshest of Canadian, like Saskatchewan, right? That's the hub. Yay, Saskatchewan. I know there's a lot of people here from Saskatchewan, but y'all are the belly of our wheat source. So we've got to make it grow in Saskatchewan temperatures. So that's what we do to it. Let me just can I move this? Yeah, okay. I'm going to move this picture of me. So gluten sensitivity, I just want you to really take a look at this, and I don't want to just brush over it. Take a look at these things that in the literature, gluten sensitivity is linked to muscle pain and weakness, depression, cancer, osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, migraines, thyroid function, diminished reflexes, clinical evidence of upper and lower motor neuron degeneration in the brain, white matter lesions, sound familiar, bipolar disorder, obesity, schizophrenia, a waddling gait, widespread fatigue, anxiety, miscarriage, failure to thrive in kids, autoimmune disease, poor tooth enamel, and generally poor overall sense of well-being. Seriously? Why would anybody eat this stuff? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. A study out of Italy, probably one of Dr. Fasano's studies, showing that the longer gluten-sensitive people eat gluten, the more likely they are to develop autoimmune diseases. So like I said, gluten is firmly in that multiple sclerosis equation. So let's get it out of the equation and see what the result is. Remember, I said it's never one thing, it's not even two things, it's everything you do. But this can be a huge part of what you do. So gluten may provide the necessary trigger to start the autoimmune disease. So you know what? The cards have been stacking up, and then it might just be the trigger to activate it and to get to keep it going. I want to talk about this very specifically because I said, why do we keep eating it? Well, you've ever heard the term comfort food? Have you ever wondered what the term comfort food means? Well, now we have a scientific explanation for that too. Why are we so attracted to those muffins and tarts and bread and pasta and wraps and crackers and all those things? Because gluten peptides look and act just like morphine. So remember last week we talked about the research about the mind, and we talked about Candace Pert. Candace Pert was the neuroscientist who discovered the morphine receptor in the brain, the feel-good receptor, as she referred to it as. Well, gluten peptides look and act just like morphine in the brain. So it's as addictive as cocaine is in some people. It increases the serotonin and it gives you that automatic feel-good feeling, which once it dwindles away makes you want more. So you reach for more. It dwindles away, you want more. So it actually lights up the brain on functional MRI, just like cocaine does, the same brain centers. So that's pretty big news. So in one way, it may explain how you need to engage your self-compassion to realize that you're dealing with an addiction. It's not just, I'll just blow some gluten off, it may take you a little bit longer, but please don't use it as an excuse to say, oh, I'm addicted to gluten, because that's simply not good enough if we're in the business of transforming MS, right? There's now evidence, and I remember we had somebody talking in the thread, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, but they shared with us depression, about the depression. And I mean, right now, so this time of year, less sunlight, 2 years into COVID, oh God, can you lock me in my house any longer? The Christmas time, which is not a happy and ha ha ho ho time for everybody. We've got some serious mood stuff going on this time of year, don't we? Well, guess what? There's now evidence that major depression is accompanied by the activation of the inflammatory response, that pro-inflammatory cytokines may induce depressive disorders. And this is all caused by gluten. So this is a big connection between mood and food, and what is it all about? It's all about the inflammation. And remember, we said inflammation in the gut jumps on that vagus nerve superhighway, is translated into inflammation in the brain. So once again, remove that trigger and let's see where we are, Like, I want you to understand that it's, I'm all about what does it mean to handle, to transform MS naturally. And it's not just about a bucket of supplements. It's about how does the body heal. And if we've got an equation, if we know 1 + 1 + 1 equals multiple sclerosis, then let's take one of those ones out of the equation and see what we're left with and see what your body's doing. And then you can reassess and redirect what it is you need. Not everybody needs the same laundry list of supplements. I think we need to talk about supplements at some point, don't we? Now I just want you to look at what are glutinous grains versus gluten-free grains. So the gluten-free grains are quinoa, brown rice, buckwheat, wild rice, millet, and amaranth. And grains that contain gluten are wheat, spelt, rye, oats, barley, and kamut. And I know people are always surprised to hear that that spelt has gluten in it, and yes, it does. Spelt is kind of like wheat's ugly cousin, They're related in a lot of ways, but they're just different enough to be individual. And another one, oats. With the oats, people are also often like freaked out by that because they say, I have oatmeal every morning. Well, that's just a really bad Scottish habit. And I say that very tongue-in-cheek because half of my heritage is Scottish. But the real thing with oats is that, well, actually a couple of things. First of all, oats are mostly processed on the same equipment that wheat is. So there's a lot of cross-contamination that goes on there. Now, you can find gluten-free oats, and you can find gluten-free oats in every grocery store, at least here in Canada you can. But the thing about any grain is the more you refine it, the more it becomes a problem from an inflammatory perspective, because it gets dumped into your bloodstream more quickly as blood sugar. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So if you're eating oats that are rolled oats, then that's like processed food, right? Because the whole grain looks like this and your rolled oat looks like this. The instant oats that you get in the little baggies now, they're just like a nutritional disaster because that's basically pulverized oats. So, and with sugar, because they're all flavored, right? They taste like maple, or they taste like apple cinnamon or something like that. So they've not only got the hyper refined grain, but they also have sugar in them. So, you know what? Honestly, I know people feel better when they eat oats than they do when they were eating their pancakes and their waffles and their Pop-Tarts and things. But if that's where you are now, I'm going to gently and lovingly ask you to raise your bar again and get rid of the oats and try eating something like chia pudding, or something different like soup or something for breakfast. And I'm not joking about that. Okay. So at the end of the day, it's about overconsumption, and understanding that overconsumption is not only driven by marketing and everything such as it is in the Western world, but it's also driven by the fact that the comfort food, the element of it makes it go, yum, this tastes good. I want some more, right? And who hasn't been faced with that situation? I know there's a lot that needs to come between me and a good not bagel, a croissant. These, so highly refined gluten-free grains quickly enter the blood sugar, cause inflammation. And I wanted to address corn because people often say, oh, well, they're corn chips, so they're gluten-free. Well, for a whole bunch of different reasons, corn is the new wheat. So corn has gone from something that historically has had like 9 grams of protein per cob to one that is primarily carbohydrates. So that protein has just been genetically modified right out of it because, once again, we like that sweet corn, right? We want the sweet, we want the sweet. So we've got to be careful of the corn now. Sorry, doesn't count. And another thing I wanted to mention just here with these random thoughts is the fact that grains are very dehydrating. So if you've got a problem with constipation, for example, grains are definitely not your friend because you've got to be super hydrating, or you stay away from water because your bladder is going crazy, but you eat a lot of grains. That's like double trouble, right? Just double trouble. Okay. Another good point about grains is they are high in something called phytic acid. Phytic acid is something that's just considered an anti-nutrient. And what phytic acid does is that it blocks or interferes with how your body absorbs nutrients. So therefore, and I mean by nutrients, that could be calcium. It's a lot of minerals, to be perfectly honest with you. But the same phytates or phytic acid is highly identified in osteoporosis. So we want to, for reasons that aren't even associated with gluten, we want to identify these grains as containing these anti-nutrients called phytic acid that can lead to other problems. And you know what? There's many women out there listening to that. Actually, osteoporosis isn't just exclusive to women. Men suffer from osteoporosis too. But it's just another normal thing that happens to us as we age. So we don't want to be contributing to that unnecessarily, especially if you have a tendency to trip and fall every once in a while. Okay, the big second one, second only to like gluten and gluten's impact, and I don't even know if I can say second to because it's equally important, is the role of blood sugar in protecting the brain. And how does that relate to grains? That relates to grains because we have so many processed grains, straight carbs, they get dumped into in nature. Okay, Mother Nature has a great way of balancing carbohydrates and fiber and protein all on her own. She didn't need a keto guide to do that. She did it all on her own before we got into crazy diets. But to make things cook faster, to make things look more important, like white rice and processed wheat, these grains get refined and refined and refined so that, for example, let's use the example of rice. White rice is polished rice. And that is having the wheat germ or the fiber portion of that grain removed, polished it. So it looks, you know what? It all started when we started to get elitist in our food. And it was like, I'm of good means. I don't eat that dirty brown rice. I want white rice. I want polished rice. That's where white bread came in. This was supposed to be a more of elitist thing. What it does though is the fiber usually neutralizes or at least decreases the carbohydrate content so that it doesn't flood your system with blood sugar. So refined grains very quickly get turned into blood sugar in your body. And that leads, what happens with blood sugar is there's a hormone called insulin whose job it is to take that sugar, put it into the cell where it can be burned for energy. And when we're flooding our system, as we do with a standard Western diet, the cell's going, I don't have enough receptors to get all this insulin, and we become something called insulin resistant. And that insulin resistance leads us to blood sugar problems. And oh, guess what that is? Inflammatory. So if you haven't caught the key word to life with MS yet, inflammation would be considered right in there. Okay. So fat, think about the brain. The brain is the biggest, it has the most mitochondria. It is the biggest consumer of a lot of things, water, oxygen, and we want to be fueling it with good fuel as well. So it will burn, to create energy, either glucose or fat. And fat is a dirty burn. So, do you get what I mean when I say a dirty burn? I think the men in the audience would get it. But when something's not burning cleanly, if it's not a clean burn, it's not efficient. So the brain by far prefers fat as the fuel than carbohydrates. So this all goes straight back up to the brain. For almost our entire existence, carbohydrates, and I mean our existence as men and women on the face of the earth, carbohydrates have been scarce. Like I said, Mother Nature provided, a very small amount of cereal grains at very specific times of year, and when that was done, that was done. So now we've got this excess. So before, our brain's primary fuel was fat, very, very naturally. Okay, we've got all kinds of great research coming out now, and little ditties like midlife obesity is associated with a higher risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, so both neurodegenerative diseases. And in obesity, there is a decreased bioavailability of vitamin D. So have you got, especially now, an extra COVID roll around here? Well, understand that obesity, and I would say, I don't know the statistics offhand, but they're huge, the percentage of the population in the Western world who is considered statistically morbidly obese. We don't think about it because we just keep making cuter clothes to cover up those rolls and stuff, but it doesn't take away from the fact that those rolls exist, and those rolls generally are associated with insulin resistance, which means the brain's not getting fueled properly, which means vitamin D's not getting absorbed properly, and that becomes a big concern for us with MS. So you want to be doing everything you can be to be managing your blood sugar. And what are great ways to do that? If you eat grains, then make sure that they are whole grains and sort of like wild rice or brown rice. I'm going to get into that in a minute. So I just wanted to leave you with another thought. It is that Alzheimer's disease, for quite a while now, has been referred to as type 3 diabetes. So like a direct connection between neurodegeneration and blood sugar management. So like I said, it's almost parallel with gluten in my books, and blood sugar is always one of the first things that I work to balance with people. Okay? So let's talk about how do you navigate a grain minimal existence? Because good God, we're drowning in it, aren't we? So first of all, it requires that commitment. It requires understanding that you're doing something wonderful for yourself, and the self-compassion to say, okay, I did great for 2 weeks and I fell off the wagon, and the self-compassion to get back on the wagon again, because remember, this is a process. There's not a beginning and an end to it. So that is really, really important. So gluten-free always, and the self-compassion to get back on the wagon, so to speak. Okay. If you're not completely grain-free and you can't fathom a life that is grain-free, then go think about grain minimal. So think about, okay, so now we know that everything that we've had hammered into our heads for the last 100 years, which is the dinner plate looks like meat, starch, vegetable, that starch doesn't have to be there. The perfect dinner plate in my kitchen is a protein and then vegetables and colors. 3 different colors, maybe 2 colors on the plate and a salad. But we just don't eat grains, am I? No. We don't eat grains. If you're going to make muffins and things like that, that's not totally out of the question. You can eat almond flour, coconut flour. Take a look for keto recipes. So I have a habit of Googling like entire sentences. So I will Google delicious paleo, keto, gluten-free, morning glory muffins. And that's a literal example of what I did last week. And you'll get a bunch of recipes, and you can start looking at them and saying, okay, that looks doable, and start making some recipes out of things other than grains. And just eat whole foods, instead of taking crackers to dip in guacamole, use a celery stick or a carrot stick. It doesn't take long for your body to stop the cravings. So once you stop feeding the monster, things adjust, and all of a sudden you don't have those cravings anymore, because a lot of the perpetuation of the refined grain story is the always craving, and especially that evening craving, and that's where if you jump back on the group and scroll back, Rivers gave us a beautiful recipe for some golden milk, and something like that in the evening is ideal because it's fat dominant. It's got anti-inflammatory herbs in it, and you put a bit of cinnamon in it or a bit of vanilla, and it curbs that craving for sweet. Actually, that's a pretty good point that I should probably make here. When you're trying to get off the sugar and you're trying to get off the refined grains and trying to manage those cravings, vanilla and cinnamon are herbs that are naturally sweet, but they don't have any element of sugar. In fact, cinnamon is directly connected to managing diabetes. I used to, or I still do sometimes when it's appropriate, prescribe chia and cinnamon in a drink. So a tablespoon of chia and a teaspoon of cinnamon in a large glass of water, stir it up and belt it back once or twice a day. And that really helps to whip the blood sugar into shape. So we can take a look at your diet. Just do a diet diary, do a diet journal for a while, and just take a look and see how much grains are, what kind of a role they play in your diet. And wherever you are with that, try to kick it back a notch. Like I said, if you're eating oatmeal for breakfast every morning, then go for chia pudding. And if you've never had chia pudding before, go and Google chia pudding recipes and you'll get all kinds of great ideas. Chia is a seed that absorbs 7 times its weight in water. So a couple of tablespoons to a cup of almond milk or something, some cinnamon and vanilla, maybe some smashed blueberries. Beautiful breakfast, absolutely beautiful breakfast. And the muffins that you can make with almond flours, just getting more whole foods on your plate instead of that old starch, protein, veg paradigm. So just moving into a more healing diet. Okay. So do we have any questions, Mike?
Is 90% gluten-free good?
No. 90, that's an excellent question. Did you ask that or did somebody else?
I faked it.
Yeah, okay. So that's a really great point. 90% gluten is not enough. Is not enough. I read, actually, I was at a conference where Dr. Fasano had just published a paper, and they were monitoring how long it took gluten to damage the gut, as in blow those gap junctions wide open so proteins could leak through and aggravate the immune system, and then how long it took the gut to recover again. And it took 30 to 60 seconds for gluten to damage the gut enough to cause a leaky gut. And the study was over at, I can't remember, 7 or 8 months. And the guts had, of the people that were in the study, had recovered about 75%. So it damages instantly and it takes forever to come back. So that's why we really want to, if you make a commitment to nothing else, and I really mean that, as you clean up that bucket of muddy water, remember that analogy I gave you before? Your body's not going to have the tolerance for things anyway. But if you make a 100% commitment to anything, please make it gluten-free. I've had patients in the past who say, yeah, I just don't feel like I'm getting anywhere, and I could see they've plateaued. And so, I do my gentle investigation into why that is. And I find out that they're perfect on their diet. Their diet is perfect, gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, lots of vegetables from Monday to Friday. And then on Saturday and Sunday, they order pizza and they order Chinese food and they just completely blow it. And they think that they can just do the Monday to Friday thing. This is not, you don't get the weekends off, unfortunately. There's too much science now to show that that's got to be a commitment you got to make. So, like I said, if you do nothing else, a gluten-free diet is perfect for you and for me. Doesn't mean you're never going to. Doesn't mean you're never going to do it. And remember, be compassionate with yourself, but understand that if you do blow it and consume gluten, then you better be taking some more, like, double down on your probiotics. Like there's, if you, okay. So I'm going to tell you this, and if you tell anybody I told you this, I will deny it forever. And that's great because this is going to be on the internet eventually. But if you're going to Aunt Mary's at Christmas time, and Aunt Mary makes the best butter tarts in the world, and you don't think you're going to be able to resist it, get some digestive enzymes. And honestly, when I first started practicing, I was quite a purist, and I thought, I'm not going to ever prescribe digestive enzymes because, damn it, I'm going to help people restore their gut function without them. And I've just gotten, after 20 years of practice, to be very practical about it. And if we can mitigate damage before, then we don't have as much to heal up. So there are gluten-specific digestive enzymes out there that were developed to target that protein. So, like I said, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but especially for Christmas, man, get out there and get some of those because we don't want that setback. I've seen a lot of thumbs up. Oh, brother, I've created a monster. Okay, does slippery elm help? Renee, what a beautiful, beautiful question. Yes, slippery elm helps. So slippery elm is the inside bark from the elm tree, and it's what they call mucilaginous. And so that means if you mix it with water, it will look like mucus, but think of that as soothing. So it's very anti-inflammatory to the gut. And you can get slippery elm tea. Marshmallow root is another one that is very soothing for an irritated gut. So actually, this might be more appropriate than I think going into the holiday season. So there you go. Get your gluten digestive enzymes and get yourself some slippery elm. It's not usually a tea. It's usually a powder, and you make a little bit of a gruel out of it. So you could put like a teaspoon into a cup of water and pop it back, or just some marshmallow root tea. Marshmallow root and licorice root tea, really, really soothing for the gut. So we want to keep, and guess what? Castor oil packs. If you get back from Aunt Mary's and you've still got butter tart crumbs on your chin, make sure you've got those digestive enzymes into you and get that castor oil pack on. Okay, great question, Renee. Thank you. Another Renee question. Isn't brown rice harder to digest than white? Of course it is. So the question is, isn't brown rice harder to digest than white rice? Of course it is. It's still got all its parts. It's still got the fiber and the protein. White rice is just got everything polished right off of it. So it just goes into your system. And like I said, it gets dumped into your bloodstream as sugar really quickly because it doesn't have to digest the fiber and all of the other stuff. For sure. Great questions, Renee. Thank you, darling. Okay, so I hope today has helped, as I always do. I think now it was probably more timely than I thought as we all wander off into our holiday festivities. And I wish you, for those of you who are celebrating Christmas this weekend, I wish you a Merry, Merry, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And for those of you who are celebrating something else or have just celebrated something else that I apologize I'm not as familiar with because I was raised with Christmas, I hope you've had wonderful holidays as well. And we will see you next week. And I haven't disclosed my topic yet, have I? That's because I haven't thought about it. I did think about it and I forgot.
You mentioned supplements.
You know what? It always comes to me, like a divine intervention. Anyway, good night. God bless. And we will see you. Oh, no. One more time before the new year. Okay. See you next week. Bye-bye.